Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It's a coincidence, or I should say a synchronicity, because really there are no coincidences anymore. But I was going through my YouTube feed after dinner tonight and saw that we have this Carrington event, coronal hole opening up on the sun. And wow, it blows me away because I opened up this newspaper article earlier and it's got the same type of thing here. So I thought it was just really cool and I put them side by side so you could see it. And now I am just going to read you what this 1926 article has to say about finding a real Chinese dragon in the sun. Confucius and Buddha, indeed all the wise and holy men of ancient China, believed in the existence of a great dragon. They believed it lived in the sky. They believed it was the center and mainspring of the universe. Suns and stars and gods and men, and this little floating bubble called the earth, were merely the sparks and breath from the nostrils of the great dragon. Furthermore, some of them believed and swore that they had actually seen it. Confucius, who was a modest gentleman, only claimed that he had once had a glimpse of its tail. In that connection, it is interesting to read about Moses' partial vision of Jehovah. But many other Chinese insisted that they had seen the whole of this great dragon in the sky. Enlightened science for the past 1,000 years has laughed at this superstition. But now, all of a sudden, and totally unexpectedly, science has discovered that there is a great dragon in the sky. It is a tremendous black shadow, believed to be cast by the mountains of the moon, enlarged and projected on the sky by the giant reflector surface of the sun. I shouldn't laugh because, you never freaking know nowadays. Um, and it has precisely the form and outlines of the great dragon worshipped by the ancient Chinese and depicted in their old religious art. Its claws and head and tail are all there, like a black silhouette thrown up on screen by an old-fashioned magic lantern. Maybe the old Chinese knew this too, for one day when Lao Tzu was sitting under a plum tree, solemnly contemplating his own navel, two disciples said to him, "Master, have you ever seen the great dragon?" And he replied, "No, man, except in dreams can see more than its shadow." Like many another great scientific discovery, the modern verification of this shadow's existence came wholly by accident. A few weeks ago, when the world's weather went crazy, astronomers thought sunspots might explain it. People were swimming in Labrador, golfing in Alaska, skating in the south of France, taking sun baths in Siberia, while the monks of Algeria jumped out of their cells and engaged in snowball battles on the African hillside. Wow, that reminds me of today's wacky weather, doesn't it? History repeats itself. So where were we? Da-da-da-da-da. Butterflies appeared at Cape Nome and seals off the coast of Cytherea, where Venus once rose from the foam. And all the great telescopes of the world were turned on the sun to see what happened to our great central heating something. One of the observers was Richard Clegan, an American photographic ray expert who had been experimenting with motion picture machines hooked onto telescopes. Clegan got permission to mount his machine on the rooftop of a big Paris apartment house on the hill of Montmartre and made a series of slow motion pictures of the sun. Not only did he make interesting new discoveries about sunspots, but one of the results of the analysis of the films was to show that the sun acts as a gigantic reflector which mirrors passing planets and projects enormous images from them against the curtain of the sky. Clegan finally succeeded in registering a reflection of the moon against the dust envelope of the sun, showing on the surface of the sun the shadow of an enormous figure, which is an outline startlingly like the great Chinese dragon. So far as they are able to tell, a weird light distortion of the markings of the moon with its mountains and dead volcanic craters is responsible for this phenomenon, but this latter detail has not been proven. The shadow dragon seems to be flying through a sea of flame, which also fits in with the ancient Chinese beliefs. One of the mysteries in connection with this discovery is how Clegan, with a comparatively small telescope and motion picture lens, has been able to record things which the enormous telescopes like the Yerkes and Mount Wilson observatory instruments have never shown. I wonder why. That kind of sounds like also what's happening today with 3i Atlas NASA pictures and regular astronomers that are in their backyard with their telescopes, but I digress. His own explanation is that he can get better pictures than can be obtained with the biggest lenses because the latter are unable to penetrate completely the dust envelope of the sun owing to decomposition of light. The Clegan method is to catch the image of the sun or planets by their own light in a prism, intensifying the light of the image and throwing it on a screen many thousands of times magnified. Thus, the moving celestial bodies are photographed on the screen. The other mystery is involved in the question of whether or not the ancient Chinese had actually seen this great dragon, which figures so deeply in all their art and religion, and if so, how they were able to see it, since it is generally believed they did not have telescopes. One possible explanation is that they had never seen it at all, that it was simply a product of their poetic imaginations, and that the fact, now discovered, that such a dragon actually exists, at least as a figure in the sky, is merely an astonishing coincidence. It is, however, almost too much of a coincidence, hence why I started off with the coincidence and synchronicity, which I did not know was in here, so that's even more of a synchronicity. It's almost too much of a coincidence to believe, and it is not really at all sure that the ancient Chinese did not have telescopes. They did have able astronomers, not only in the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu, which was about 500 BC, but as far back as 3000 BC. At that period in the world's history, Europe and England were still in savagery, but China had a far advanced civilization. There is a record showing that the Emperor Yao, about 2300 BC, promulgated an order with reference to the equinoxes and solstices, also the solar and lunar eclipses. The same record relates how two famous astronomers, Sai and Ho, that's funny, I call my sister Ho, were put to death by this emperor because although they had successfully made the computations regarding a certain solar eclipse, they failed to go through the proper rites and sacrifices in propitiation of the great dragon. It was in the extraordinary and still living religion of the Taoists that the followers of Lao Tzu originated the idea that the great dragon was a sort of deified center of all the forces and laws of nature. Lao Tzu himself is placed by many students of comparative religions and philosophers as above Jesus and Buddha in purity and holiness of life, and as above Socrates and Plato in philosophic wisdom. In other words, they regard him as the best and wisest man who ever lived. Confucius considered himself to be a mere child as compared with Lao Tzu, and once after having visited Lao Tzu came back to his own pupils in such a state of dejection over his own ignorance that he sat for 3 weeks without uttering a word. Lao Tzu taught, that's probably the 10th different way I pronounce that last name, but let's just go with it. Taught, as did Socrates, entirely by speaking, and in his old age, at about 80, had never written a word. As an old man, he bid farewell to his pupils, mounted on the back of an ox, and rode westward alone toward the great mountains where he intended to die in peace as a hermit. But when he arrived at one of the gates in the great Chinese wall and asked leave of the sentry to pass, the sentry recognized him as the great Lao Tzu. He ran running to the governor in the watchtower, and the governor came and fell on his knees before the venerable old man and begged him, in the name of all the Chinese people, before departing forever, to write a book communicating his wisdom to future generations. For some unknown reason, the supplications of this governor, who was merely, after all, an illiterate military officer, prevailed where the begging of his philosopher friends had failed, and Lao Tzu sat down and wrote, for more than a month, a little book of 5,000 words only. Darn, 5,000 words in a month? Are these people's like superheroes? Which is called the Tao Te King, pronounced Tao Te Ching. It is a very wonderful book and has been translated, usually badly, into many languages. It has been said of it that the book is so wonderfully simple that a child might understand it, yet so simple too that there is no man in the world wise or profound enough to understand its full meaning. For Lao Tzu, the great dragon was merely a symbol of the universal forces of nature and life. It is a curious fact that the dragon and the serpent were symbols of power, of natural forces, of wisdom, and of goodness in practically all of the ancient Oriental religions. It was only the Greeks and Romans and the Christians who turned it into a symbol of evil, as they did with nearly all the ancient Oriental gods and powers. The dragon or serpent appears in the Garden of Eden and in subsequent Jewish and Christian mythology as synonymous with Satan, Beelzebub, and the devil. Every country and every age has had its belief in dragons, frequently related to great cosmic and nature forces. The Scandinavians believed in a great Midgard serpent, which laid coil around an enormous rock at the bottom of the oceans, and on which the continents rested. Earthquakes and tidal waves and storms were caused by the shifting of its enormous coils, and volcanoes spewed out the fiery breath from its nostrils. The huge dragon slain by Siegfried in the German Nibelung legends was also indirectly connected with cosmic nature forces and nature magic, since when Siegfried bathed in its blood, his body became invulnerable, and when he tasted its blood, he was immediately able to understand the language of the birds. In America, among the ancients, the plumed serpent, which has just inspired a novel by D.H. Lawrence, was a dragon as definitely identified with the center and mainspring of all life as was the great Chinese dragon itself. Students have always believed that this ancient belief in dragons was either a survival of the time when they were prehistoric monsters, great winged flying reptiles like dragons, or that it came from the discovery of their remains. But one of the great mysteries has always been just how much or how little the ancient civilizations like Egypt and Chaldea and Assyria and China knew of science and astronomy. There is some ground to believe that they had microscopes and knew many of the mysteries concerning bacteria and microscopic life, which were subsequently lost to humanity and only recently rediscovered. In the same way, they may have had telescopes and may have actually seen the same shadow of the great dragon in the sky, which has now been rediscovered, by modern astronomy. And that's it for this one. That was a long one. So, hope you enjoyed it. Very interesting how history repeats in the land of the lost. Let's see, above in that picture, there is Madame Gabrielle Camille Flammarion, widow of the celebrated French astronomer and herself a noted scientist who has tried to verify Mr. Klegan's photographic experiments with sunspots. At left, the great dragon of Chinese religion and philosophy, which they identify with the final ultimate source of nature and life. And that right there is an enlargement of Richard Klegan's moving picture film of the curious shadow projected on the dust envelope of the sun, showing how plainly it resembles the great dragon which the Chinese have worshipped for centuries. So there you have it. Another old newspaper with little gleans of information that we can bring into the present, because everything is the now moment anyway, isn't it? Have fun. Enjoy. Be safe. Good night.